Becoming your truest self beyond societal masks, there's a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got last night. It's the tiredness that settles into your bones when you've spent another day performing. When you've smiled through conversations that meant nothing, agreed with opinions you don't hold, and carefully edited every word before it left your mouth. You drive home in silence, and in that silence, a question emerges from somewhere deep. Asterisk, who am I when no one is watching? Asterisk, the ancient Greeks had a word for the theatrical masks worn by actors asterisk, persona asterisk. These masks allowed one person to play many roles, to become king, beggar, hero, or fool. But here's what's haunting: we never stopped wearing them. We just forgot they were masks at all. You have one face for your parents, another for your colleagues, another for your friends, another for strangers. You've become so skilled at this performance that you can switch between them without thinking. But late at night, when the house is quiet and the masks finally come off, who's looking back at you from the mirror? This isn't a question about authenticity in some shallow Instagram quote kind of way. This is about something far more fundamental, the terrifying possibility that you've been living someone else's life, following a script you never agreed to, becoming a person you never chose to be. And now, after years of this performance, you're not even sure there's anyone left underneath. Let me tell you about someone. We'll call her Sarah. On paper, Sarah's life looks perfect. She's a successful marketing director at a prestigious firm. She's engaged to a kind man her parents adore. She owns a beautiful apartment in the city. Her social media shows a life of dinner parties, weekend getaways, and carefully curated moments of happiness. But here's what nobody sees: Sarah hasn't had an original thought in years. Every morning, she wakes up and puts on her professional mask. Confident, competent, unflappable. At work, she says what her bosses want to hear, angles her opinions to match the room, and swallows her actual thoughts like bitter pills. With her fiancé, she plays the role of the easygoing partner who loves his friends, enjoys the same restaurants, wants the same future. With her parents, she's still the good daughter who made them proud, who never disappointed them, who followed the path they envisioned. And somewhere in the constant switching between these roles, Sarah disappeared. She can't remember the last time she expressed a genuine preference. Mexican or Italian for dinner, I don't mind, you choose. Career or family, whatever makes sense. What do you want from life? A long pause, then a well-rehearsed answer about happiness and stability that sounds like it came from a motivational poster. The truly frightening thing isn't that Sarah is unusual, it's that she's everywhere. She's the lawyer who wanted to be a musician, the doctor who became a doctor because his father was a doctor, the mother who had children because that's what women do at 30, the businessman who chases wealth because society hands him a measuring stick called money and tells him this is how we determine your worth. We live in a world of invisible choreography. From the moment you could understand language, you've been receiving instructions. Be polite. Be successful. Be attractive. Be humble but not too humble. Be confident but not arrogant. Be yourself, but make sure that self is acceptable, marketable, appropriate. The rules are everywhere, spoken and unspoken, explicit and implied, and most insidiously, they've become so internalized that you no longer recognize them as external impositions. They feel like your own thoughts, your own desires, your own choices. Here's the mechanism. Every time you expressed your authentic self as a child and faced rejection, correction, or punishment, a part of you learned to hide. When you cried and were told to stop being so sensitive. When you expressed anger and were told, good children don't behave that way. when you showed excitement and were told to calm down, when you shared a dream and were told to be realistic. Each micro-rejection taught you which parts of yourself were acceptable and which needed to be locked away. So you built what Jung called the persona asterisk, a compromise between who you are and who the world demands you to be. And it worked. The persona got you approval, success, belonging. It protected you from rejection and judgment. It helped you navigate the complex social world. But here's what nobody warned you about. The persona is a hungry ghost. Feed it long enough, and it grows so strong it eclipses the original self entirely. You become the mask. The performance becomes your reality. The tragedy deepens when you realize that everyone around you is doing the same thing. You're not connecting with real people, you're connecting with their masks. You're having surface-level conversations between constructed identities. It's performance meeting performance, mask meeting mask. And underneath all of it, there's a profound loneliness that no amount of social success can touch. Because the real you, whoever that is, remains utterly unknown, unseen, unwitnessed. This is the modern condition, a world full of strangers who don't recognize themselves, performing for other performers, all desperately seeking authenticity while simultaneously terrified of it. Because authenticity means risk. It means potential rejection. It means standing in your truth even when that truth isn't convenient or comfortable or acceptable. And most of us decided long ago that the price was too high. But there's a cost to the alternative that we rarely discuss. The unlived life, the unexpressed self, the dreams deferred until they died, the opinions swallowed, the creativity suppressed, the passion dimmed, the authentic voice that grew quieter and quieter until it became a whisper, then silence. And in that silence, something begins to happen. Something that Jung understood perhaps better than anyone. The psyche will not be denied. The parts of yourself you've hidden don't simply disappear. They don't politely exit stage left when you decide they're not acceptable. They gather in the darkness of the unconscious, forming what Jung called the shadow everything you've been taught you're not supposed to be, everything that doesn't fit the persona, everything that threatens your carefully constructed identity. And the shadow grows stronger in the darkness, fed by every suppression, every denial, every moment you chose the mask over the truth. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the territory of the human psyche, and what he discovered was both terrifying and liberating. He understood that the persona, that social mask we've been discussing, isn't the enemy, it's necessary. We need it to function in society, to navigate complex social situations, to protect the vulnerable core of who we are. The problem isn't having a persona. The problem is identifying with it completely, mistaking it for the totality of who you are. Jung called the journey beyond the persona individuation the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you've been conditioned to be. But he was careful to explain that this isn't about rejecting society or becoming some sort of isolated hermit. It's about something far more subtle and profound. It's about integrating the disparate parts of yourself into a coherent whole. It's about becoming conscious of the masks you wear so you can choose when to wear them rather than being worn by them. At the heart of this process lies the confrontation with the shadow. Jung understood that everything you've repressed, denied, or hidden about yourself doesn't disappear. It forms an autonomous complex in the unconscious that has its own energy, its own agenda, its own way of manifesting in your life. The shadow contains everything that doesn't fit your conscious self-image. If you see yourself as kind, your shadow holds your cruelty. If you identify as rational, your shadow contains your irrationality. If you present as confident, your shadow harbors your insecurity. But here's what's fascinating. The shadow isn't just negative qualities. It also contains your unlived potential, your suppressed creativity, your forbidden desires, your untapped strength. Think about the person who is taught that anger is unacceptable. Their shadow holds not just rage, but also the healthy assertion, the boundary setting, the righteous indignation that protects what matters. The person who learned to always be nice has a shadow that contains not just cruelty, but also the ability to say no, to prioritize themselves, to exist without constant people pleasing. Jung realized that the shadow projects itself onto the world. The qualities you most despise in others are often the very qualities you've denied in yourself. The person who irritates you beyond reason is likely reflecting something you've refused to acknowledge within. The traits you find most contemptible in others are the ones your shadow holds. This is why shadow work begins with a humbling realization. The things you judge most harshly in the world are gateways to understanding yourself. The individuation process requires what Jung called the confrontation with the unconscious, a deliberate turning inward to face everything you've been avoiding. This isn't comfortable. It's not a weekend workshop or a self-help technique. It's a fundamental reorientation of consciousness that can feel like psychological death. Because in a very real sense, it is death. Death of the false self, death of the persona you've identified with, death of the comfortable illusions you've been living inside. Jung developed the practice of active imagination, as a way to dialogue with the unconscious. It involves giving voice to the suppressed parts of yourself, allowing them to speak, to express, to reveal their wisdom. Imagine sitting down and asking your anger what it wants to tell you, asking your sadness what it's trying to protect, asking your fear what wisdom it holds, not dismissing these aspects, not trying to change them, but listening, truly listening, to what they have to say. This is where Jung diverges radically from conventional psychology. He didn't see the unconscious as merely a repository of repressed trauma and primitive drives. He saw it as containing profound wisdom, guidance, and creativity. The unconscious isn't the enemy to be conquered by the conscious ego. It's a partner in the journey toward wholeness. The goal isn't ego, dominance over the unconscious, but rather a dynamic relationship between conscious and unconscious. A dialogue between the parts of yourself you know and the parts you've hidden. Jung introduced the concept of the self with a capital S, not the ego, not the persona, but the totality of the psyche, the organizing center that contains both conscious and unconscious. The self is who you actually are when all the parts are integrated, when the persona and the shadow are in dialogue rather than warfare, when you can contain the paradoxes and contradictions of being human without needing to split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. The journey toward the self requires what Jung called the integration of opposites. You cannot become whole by choosing only the light. You must also embrace your darkness. You cannot be fully conscious by identifying only with your strengths. You must also acknowledge your weaknesses. This isn't about becoming better in some conventional sense. It's about becoming more complete, more honest, more real. Jung observed a phenomenon he called enantiodromia *, the principle that everything eventually transforms into its opposite when taken to an extreme. The person who is excessively good will eventually be flooded by their suppressed darkness. The person who denies all vulnerability will eventually collapse under the weight of their hidden fragility. The psyche seeks balance, and it will create it one way or another, consciously through integration or unconsciously through symptom and crisis. This is why so many people experience what's commonly called a midlife crisis. It's not really about age. It's about the moment when the psyche can no longer sustain the one-sided identification with the persona. The unlived life demands to be lived. The shadow insists on recognition. The authentic self pushes toward expression. And if you don't answer this call consciously, the psyche will answer it for you through depression, anxiety, physical illness, relationship destruction, or sudden radical life changes that shock you. Everyone who knows you, Jung understood that the collective unconscious, the deep layer of the psyche we all share, contains archetypal patterns that influence our journey toward wholeness. The hero's journey, the descent into the underworld, the dark night of the soul, the death and rebirth, these aren't just stories. They're maps of psychological transformation that appear in every culture because they reflect universal patterns in human consciousness. When you begin the journey of individuation, you're not doing something new. You're walking an ancient path that countless humans have walked before you. Friedrich Nietzsche understood something crucial. No one can construct for you the bridge upon which precisely you must cross the stream of life. No one but you yourself alone. The journey toward your truest self cannot be outsourced. No guru, no system, no ideology can tell you who you are. They can only point toward the questions you must answer for yourself. Nietzsche spoke of the three metamorphoses of the spirit. First, you are the camel obedient, carrying the heavy burdens of tradition, expectation, and social conditioning. This is the persona stage where you accept what you're told, follow the prescribed path, bear the weight of others' desires for you. Then comes the transformation into the lion, the one who says, I will, against all the thou shalts. The lion fights for freedom, tears down the old tablets, rejects the imposed values. But the lion cannot create, it can only destroy what no longer serves. The final transformation is into the child innocence regained after experience, the ability to create new values, to play, to say yes, to life not out of naivety, but out of wisdom. The child creates meaning that is authentic rather than inherited. This progression mirrors the individuation journey. You must first recognize the ways you've been a camel, carrying burdens that were never yours. Then you must find the courage of the lion to reject what doesn't serve your authentic development. And finally, you must discover the creative innocence of the child who can build a new life on a foundation of self-knowledge rather than social conditioning. Soren Kierkegaard, writing a century before Jung, grasped the existential terror at the heart of becoming yourself. He wrote about the sickness unto death, a despair so deep it stems from not wanting to be yourself, or desperately wanting to be yourself, but lacking the courage to become it. Kierkegaard understood that the greatest human struggle is the struggle to accept your own existence, to bear the weight of being who you actually are rather than fleeing into the comfort of conformity. He distinguished between the aesthetic life, living for pleasure, sensation, external validation, and the ethical life, living according to universal principles and duty. But he pointed towards something beyond both, the religious or existential life, where you stand alone before the ultimate questions of existence and make a leap of faith into your own authentic being. This leap cannot be rational. It cannot be justified to others. It requires a kind of courage that most people never access because it means stepping into radical uncertainty. Eastern philosophy offers another dimension to understanding the journey beyond masks. In Buddhist thought, what we take to be the self is actually anatta, no self, an illusion created by the mind's habit of clinging to identity. The persona, in this view, isn't just false. The very notion of a solid, unchanging self is the fundamental misunderstanding. The freedom comes not from finding your true self underneath the masks, but from realizing there's no fixed self to find at all. You are a process, not a thing, a verb, not a noun. This might seem to contradict Jung's notion of individuation and the self, but perhaps it's a deeper layer of the same insight. The integrated self Jung points toward isn't a solid entity. It's the awareness that can hold all the contradictions, all the paradoxes, all the changing faces without needing to identify with any single one. It's the consciousness that watches the masks without being fooled by them. The Taoist concept of wu-wei effortless action, non-doing, points toward a kind of authenticity that emerges not from striving but from alignment. When you're living from your true nature, action flows naturally. There's no gap between who you are and what you do, no exhausting performance, no splitting of energy between the authentic and the projected self. But getting to this place requires first becoming aware of all the ways you're not in alignment, all the ways you're forcing, performing, pretending. Heidegger's concept of *Dasein*, being there, emphasizes that human existence is characterized by our thrownness into a world we didn't choose, filled with possibilities we must navigate. We are always already interpreting ourselves through the lens of the social world we inhabit. But Heidegger distinguishes between authentic existence, where we consciously take responsibility for our being, and inauthentic existence, where we simply adopt the interpretations handed to us by the they, das Man, the anonymous collective voice of social convention. Living authentically, for Heidegger, means confronting your own finitude, your own death, and making choices based on your ownmost possibility rather than social scripts. It means pulling yourself out of the comfortable numbness of just doing what one does, and instead asking, what does my existence demand of me? The existentialists, Sartre, Camus, Beauvoir, all circled around the same terrifying insight. You are radically free, and this freedom is a burden most people flee from. Sartre's famous declaration that existence precedes essence means you have no predetermined nature, no fixed self. You are what you make yourself through your choices. The persona is an act of bad faith, lying to yourself about your freedom by pretending you had to become who you've become, that you had no choice. This is simultaneously liberating and terrifying. If you're not bound by your past, your conditioning, your social role, then who are you? The vertigo of freedom sends most people running back to the comfort of their masks. But for those who can bear it, this realization opens up the possibility of genuine self-creation. The ancient Greek maxim, know thyself, carved into the temple of Apollo at Delphi. I wasn't offering casual advice. It was pointing toward the most difficult task a human being can undertake. Because knowing yourself requires confronting not just who you think you are, but who you've been pretending to be, who you're afraid you are, who you could become. It requires looking into the abyss that Nietzsche warned about, and recognizing that the abyss is looking back because it is you. All these philosophical traditions converge on a similar insight. The unexamined life isn't worth living not because examination makes life meaningful, but because without examination, you never actually live your life at all. You live out a script, play a role, fulfill an expectation, and at the end, you die never having met yourself. So how does this actually happen? How do you begin the journey from persona to authentic self, not as a concept, not as an aspiration, but as a lived reality? It usually begins with a crack in the facade, a moment when the mask slips and you glimpse something underneath. Maybe it's a period of illness or loss that strips away your usual defenses. Maybe it's an achievement you worked years toward that feels hollow when you finally reach it. Maybe it's a relationship ending because your partner says, "I don't even know who you are anymore," and you realize you don't either. Maybe it's the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, when you suddenly can't remember why you're doing any of this. These cracks are invitations. Jung called them encounters with the self, moments when the deeper psyche breaks through the persona's control and demands attention. The conventional response is to plaster over the crack, to double down on the performance, to distract yourself back into numbness. But if you're brave enough to stay with the crack, to let it widen, to look through it, that's when the journey begins. The first step is observation without judgment. Start noticing when you're performing. Notice the shift in your energy when certain people enter the room. Notice the opinions you express that aren't actually yours. Notice the moments when you edit yourself before speaking. Notice the gap between what you feel and what you show. Notice the exhaustion that comes from managing your image. Just notice, without trying to change anything yet. This observation naturally leads to questions. Why do I say yes when I mean no? Why do I laugh at jokes I don't find funny? Why do I pretend to like things I don't actually enjoy? Why am I terrified of disappointing people I don't even respect? Why do I contort myself to fit into spaces where I don't belong? The questions aren't rhetorical, they require honest answers, and honest answers require courage. Shadow work begins when you start paying attention to your reactions. The person who irritates you, what quality in them are you denying in yourself? The behavior you judge most harshly. Where does that behavior live in your own psyche? The traits you most admire in others, what unlived potential in yourself do they represent? These inquiries are uncomfortable because they dismantle your self-image. But your self-image is precisely what's preventing you from meeting your actual self. You might begin to journal, but not the superficial gratitude, journal kind. Deep writing, where you let the hand move faster than the censor, where you give voice to the parts of yourself you usually silence. Write from your anger, write from your sadness, write from your jealousy, your shame, your secret desires. Let the shadow speak on the page without editing it for palatability. Or you might start paying attention to your dreams. Jung considered dreams the direct communication from the unconscious, offering guidance, compensation, and insight. When you dream of the shadow figure chasing you, that's not random. That's the part of yourself you're running from. When you dream of the house with hidden rooms, that's your psyche showing you there's more to you than you've explored. Dreams speak in symbols because the unconscious communicates in the language of image and metaphor, not rational discourse. The relationship piece is crucial. Begin experimenting with small truths, not brutal honesty that uses truth as a weapon, but genuine expression. Actually, I'd prefer not to, instead of I don't mind. I disagree, instead of silence. I need time alone, instead of pretending you're always available. Watch what happens. Some relationships will strengthen because they were hungry for the real you. Others will end because they were built on the persona, and without it, there's nothing there. This is where many people retreat, because authenticity comes at a price. You will disappoint people who were attached to your mask. You will lose relationships that required your inauthenticity to function. You will face judgment from those who are threatened by your growth because it highlights their own stagnation. The herd doesn't celebrate the individual, it punishes deviation. So you must decide, do you want approval or do you want integrity? Because you cannot have both all the time. But here's what emerges on the other side of this discomfort: real connection. When you drop the persona, you create space for others to drop theirs. When you speak your truth, you give others permission to speak theirs. When you show your vulnerability, You dissolve the barriers that keep everyone isolated in their performance. The relationships that remain, or that form new, have a depth and authenticity that the persona-based connections never touched. The integration process isn't linear. You'll have breakthroughs where everything becomes clear, followed by regressions where you catch yourself performing again. You'll take 2 steps toward authenticity and 1 step back toward comfort. That's normal. The psyche doesn't change all at once. It changes through repeated small choices, through consistent practice, through the daily decision to meet yourself honestly rather than hiding behind convenience. You'll also notice the world pushing back. Society has a vested interest in your conformity. Your authenticity threatens the unconscious bargain everyone else has made. So expect resistance from your family, who wants you to stay the person they're comfortable with, from your workplace, which has specific expectations, from your social circle, which has unspoken rules you're now breaking. Your individuation is not their problem to solve, but they'll often treat it as such. And then something shifts, not all at once, but gradually, like dawn breaking so slowly you don't notice until suddenly there's light. You realize you're no longer asking permission to be yourself. You're not checking others' reactions before expressing an opinion. You're not contorting yourself to fit into spaces where you don't belong. The exhaustion lifts because you're no longer performing. You're simply being. This doesn't mean you've become some sort of perfectly integrated being who never struggles. That's another fantasy, another ideal that would become a prison. Instead, you've developed a different relationship with yourself. You can see the masks you wear, and you choose consciously when to wear them and when to take them off. You can acknowledge your shadow without being controlled by it. You can hold the contradictions within yourself without needing to resolve them into simple explanations. You discover that authenticity isn't a destination but a practice. Every day presents new choices. Will you speak your truth or swallow it for convenience? Will you honor your needs or abandon them for approval? Will you acknowledge what you're actually feeling or paste on the socially appropriate emotion? And increasingly, you choose the path of integrity not because it's comfortable, but because living otherwise has become unbearable. The paradox is this: becoming yourself makes you less isolated, not more. When you stop performing, you attract people who respond to the real you rather than the manufactured version. Your relationships deepen because they're based on genuine meeting rather than mutual performance. You experience the profound relief of being known, actually known, by others, which can only happen when you're willing to be seen without the masks. You also develop compassion for the struggle of becoming. You see others in their personas and recognize it not with judgment, but with understanding. You know why they hide. You know the fear that keeps them locked in performance. You know the price of authenticity and why most people decide it's too high. This knowing doesn't make you superior. It makes you humble because you remember your own journey and recognize it's never finished. There's a particular freedom in no longer needing to be consistent in some artificial way. You can be serious and playful, strong and vulnerable, confident and uncertain. You can change your mind without feeling like you've betrayed some fixed identity. You can explore new interests without worrying if they fit your image. You become fluid, responsive, alive in a way that the persona never allowed. The transformation also brings unexpected gifts. Creativity flows more naturally because you're no longer censoring yourself. Decision-making becomes clearer because you're consulting your actual values rather than trying to please everyone. Energy returns because you're not exhausting yourself with performance. Presence deepens because you're actually here, in this moment, as yourself, rather than managing your image while thinking 3 steps ahead about how you're being perceived. But let's be clear, this path has its darkness. There will be periods of profound disorientation when you've let go of the old identity but haven't yet stabilized in the new. There will be loneliness when you realize how few people actually want to meet you authentically because it would require them to drop their own masks. There will be grief for the years you spent living someone else's life. There will be anger at the systems and people who taught you that your authentic self wasn't acceptable. Feel it all. This isn't bypassing towards some enlightened state where you transcend human emotion. This is descending into the fullness of human experience, including the painful parts. The tears you cried as a child when you first learned to hide yourself. Those tears are still waiting to be cried. The rage at having to contort yourself into acceptable shapes. That rage is medicine if you can let it move through you without destroying everything. Remember the question we began with. Who am I when no one is watching? By now, you understand that this question isn't answered once and settled forever. It's the question you keep asking, keep exploring, keep living into. Because you're not a static entity to be discovered like a hidden treasure. You're a dynamic process, always becoming, always evolving, always unfolding. The masks you've worn served their purpose. They protected you when you needed protection. They helped you survive in a world that often punishes authenticity. Honor them for that service, and then, gently, courageously, one mask at a time, see if you're ready to let them go. Becoming your truest self doesn't mean reaching some final, perfected state. It means developing the courage to meet yourself honestly, the strength to bear what you find there, and the wisdom to integrate all of it, light and shadow, strength and weakness, the beautiful and the broken, into a life that feels genuinely yours. This journey isn't for everyone, and that's okay. But if you've felt that peculiar exhaustion we described at the beginning, if you've ever wondered who you'd be without the performance, if you've glimpsed something beneath the surface of your constructed identity and been both terrified and curious, then perhaps this is your call to individuation. The call to stop living someone else's idea of who you should be and start discovering who you actually are. It won't be comfortable, it won't be safe, it won't win you universal approval, but it will be real. And in a world of masks meeting masks, performance meeting performance, that realness, that willingness to show up as yourself, consequences be damned, might be the most radical act available to you. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, as the saying goes. But in this case, the first step is simply this: the willingness to look, to observe yourself without the comforting lies, to ask the difficult questions, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing who you are beneath everything you've been told to be. And in that looking, in that willingness to not know, something emerges. Not the final answer, not the ultimate truth, but the beginning of a genuine relationship with yourself. And that relationship, difficult, messy, uncomfortable, real, is the foundation of everything else. It's the ground from which authentic life grows. So take off the mask, not all at once, not in every situation, but somewhere, sometime, with someone. Let yourself be seen. Let yourself be known. Let yourself exist without the armor of performance. And notice what happens. Notice how terrifying it is. Notice how liberating it is. Notice how utterly, profoundly, unexpectedly human it is. This is the journey, not toward perfection, but toward wholeness. Not toward being better, but toward being real. Not toward the person you should be, but toward the person you are and have always been, waiting beneath the masks to finally breathe.